NCIS Season 24. Shocker Gibbs secretly returned to deliver justice for Vance. The halls of NCIS headquarters had witnessed countless tragedies over the years, but nothing compared to the shock that spread through the building on a cold Washington morning. Director Leon Vance sat alone in his office, staring out the window overlooking the Navy Yard. The city moved as normal beneath him, but his world had stopped. 3 weeks earlier, a covert NCIS informant had been murdered. The case should have been routine. Instead, it had become personal. The informant, a former Marine named Ethan Cole, had been working undercover inside a dangerous criminal network responsible for military weapons trafficking. Cole had risked everything to provide information that could save countless lives. Before he could testify, he was assassinated. The murder was clean, professional, and carefully planned. Whoever ordered the hit knew exactly how NCIS operated. That realization haunted Vance. Someone inside the system was helping the killers. Someone powerful. Someone untouchable. At least that's what everyone believed. Everyone except one man. A man who had disappeared years ago. A man living quietly in Alaska. A man named Leroy Jethro Gibbs. Thousands of miles away, Gibbs was repairing an old fishing boat near Naktok Bay when his satellite phone rang. Very few people possessed that number. Even fewer would dare use it. Gibbs glanced at the screen. McGee. His expression immediately changed. Timothy McGee never called without a reason. Gibbs answered. "What happened?" There was silence. Then McGee spoke. "Boss, we need help." Gibbs said nothing. McGee continued. "Vance is being targeted." That got Gibbs's attention. "Explain." For 15 minutes, McGee laid out everything. The murdered informant, the disappearing evidence, the mysterious witnesses, the corruption, the feeling that someone inside the government was protecting the killers. When he finished, Gibbs remained silent. The old instincts were already returning. Finally, he asked a single question. "Does Vance know you're calling me?" "No." "Good." Then Gibbs hung up. 2 days later, a silver pickup truck rolled into Washington, D.C. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Most people never looked twice. Those who did quickly forgot him. The man parked several blocks away from NCIS headquarters. Then he disappeared into the city. Gibbs was home, and nobody knew. Not even Vance. Meanwhile, the investigation continued falling apart. Special Agent Nicholas Torres slammed a folder onto the conference room table. "This makes zero sense." Knight looked up. "What now?" "The financial records vanished." McGee frowned. "Vanished?" "Completely." Torres threw up his hands. "Someone deleted everything." Parker leaned back in his chair. The team had been chasing ghosts for weeks. Every lead disappeared. Every witness recanted. Every piece of evidence somehow became unusable. Someone was pulling strings. Powerful strings. Vance entered the room. Everyone immediately noticed how exhausted he looked. He hadn't slept much lately. The pressure was crushing him. "What do we have?" Vance asked. The silence told him everything. Nothing. Again. For the first time in years, Vance appeared defeated. The sight troubled Parker. Vance was one of the toughest people he'd ever known. Seeing him worn down felt wrong. Very wrong. That night, Vance left headquarters alone. The streets were quiet. Rain fell steadily. He never noticed the black SUV following him. Nor did he notice another vehicle trailing the SUV, a gray sedan, driven by Gibbs. The former NCIS agent had spent 48 hours watching, listening, following, learning. And what he discovered was disturbing. Someone wasn't merely investigating Vance. Someone was hunting him. As Vance approached a deserted intersection, the SUV accelerated. Its headlights brightened. Too bright. Too fast. Gibbs immediately recognized the move. It wasn't surveillance. It was an attack. The SUV veered toward Vance's vehicle. A deadly collision was seconds away. Without hesitation, Gibbs slammed the accelerator. His sedan crashed into the SUV. Metal exploded. Glass shattered. The impact sent both vehicles spinning. Vance barely avoided disaster. Stunned, he stopped his car and jumped out. By the time he reached the crash scene, the SUV driver was gone. So was the mysterious man who saved him. Only tire tracks remained. Vance stared into the darkness. Something about the rescue felt familiar. Very familiar. The next morning, NCIS headquarters erupted with activity. Parker examined security footage from nearby cameras. The image quality was terrible. Still, one frame caught McGee's attention. His eyes widened. No way. What? Torres asked. McGee zoomed in. The grainy image showed the driver stepping briefly from the sedan. Only for a second, but it was enough. Torres nearly fell out of his chair. Knight gasped. Parker stared. Vance froze. The face was unmistakable. Gibbs. Before anyone could react, the image disappeared. Someone had remotely erased the footage. Parker looked stunned. Did that just happen? McGee nodded slowly. Yeah. Vance crossed his arms. A rare smile appeared, for the first time in weeks. Gibbs. Elsewhere, Gibbs sat inside an abandoned warehouse studying photographs spread across a table. The deeper he dug, the uglier the truth became. The weapons trafficking network was connected to high-ranking officials, government contractors, former intelligence officers, political operatives, people protected by influence and money. The murdered informant had uncovered everything. That's why he died. And now Vance was next. Gibbs wasn't interested in politics. He wasn't interested in bureaucracy. He cared about one thing: justice. The same thing he'd cared about his entire career. Days passed. The conspiracy began unraveling. One suspect disappeared. Another fled the country. A third suddenly agreed to cooperate. The changes puzzled NCIS. Someone was pressuring the criminals. Someone dangerous. Someone relentless. Someone who knew exactly where to apply pressure. The team already suspected who it was. Late one evening, Parker entered the bullpen. He found a sealed envelope resting on his desk. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside was a flash drive. McGee examined its contents. The room fell silent. Bank records, wire transfers, secret communications. Enough evidence to destroy the trafficking organization forever. Knight looked stunned. Where did this come from? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The arrests began immediately. Federal agents stormed offices. Search warrants were executed. Suspects were taken into custody. For the first time, the network was vulnerable. But the mastermind remained free. A man named Victor Kane, former intelligence operative, brilliant strategist, cold-blooded killer, and the man responsible for Ethan Cole's murder. Kane knew the walls were closing in. Desperate people make dangerous choices. Kane was no exception. He decided to eliminate the biggest threat: Leon Vance. The final confrontation began at a decommissioned naval shipyard. Kane lured Vance there using false information. By the time NCIS realized the trap, it was almost too late. Vance found himself surrounded. Armed mercenaries emerged from every direction. Weapons raised, escape impossible. Kane stepped forward. You should have left this alone. Vance remained calm. I don't quit. Kane laughed. No, that's your problem. The mercenaries prepared to fire. Then a gunshot echoed through the shipyard. One mercenary dropped instantly. Another shot. A second attacker fell. Confusion erupted. Kane spun around. What the hell? A familiar voice answered from the shadows. Rule 91. Everyone froze. Vance smiled. He knew that voice. Gibbs emerged holding a rifle. Older, perhaps slower, but every bit as intimidating. The legend had returned. The battle erupted. Mercenaries scattered. Gunfire echoed across the shipyard. Gibbs and Vance fought side by side. Just like old times. Years vanished instantly. Instinct took over. Trust took over. The partnership remained unbreakable. One by one, Kane's men fell. Eventually, only Kane remained. Cornered, defeated, desperate. He aimed his weapon directly at Vance. Before he could pull the trigger, Gibbs fired. The bullet struck Kane's shoulder. The weapon fell harmlessly away. Federal agents arrived moments later. The nightmare was over. Hours later, the sun began rising over Washington. Emergency lights flashed in the distance. Suspects were being transported. Evidence collected. Careers saved. Lives protected. Vance stood near the waterfront. He wasn't alone. Gibbs stood beside him. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Vance broke the silence. "You could have called." Gibbs smirked. "You seemed busy." Vance laughed. The sound surprised even him. "You know everybody thinks you're retired." "I am retired." "Sure you are." Another silence followed. Comfortable this time, the kind shared only by old friends. Vance looked toward the water. "You didn't have to come back." Gibbs shrugged. "Maybe." "Then why did you?" Gibbs considered the question. Then he gave the simplest answer possible. "Because they came after one of ours." Vance nodded. That was all the explanation needed. Back at headquarters, the team gathered around the bullpen. Excitement filled the room. Rumors spread everywhere. Nobody knew exactly what had happened. Only that Gibbs had somehow appeared, dismantled a criminal empire, saved Vance's life, and vanished again. Classic Gibbs. Torres shook his head. "Nobody is ever going to believe this story." Knight smiled. "I barely believe it myself." McGee stared at an empty desk. Part of him hoped Gibbs would walk through the door again, just once, but he knew better. Gibbs had chosen his path, and he deserved peace. Still, it felt good knowing the legend was out there, watching, protecting, ready if needed. 3 days later, a package arrived at NCIS, no sender, no note. Inside was a photograph. It showed a fishing boat floating peacefully in Alaska. Written on the back were 4 simple words: "Take care of yourselves." McGee smiled. Parker laughed. Torres rolled his eyes. Vance carefully placed the photo in his office, where everyone could see it. A reminder, a symbol, a legend. Leroy Jethro Gibbs may have left NCIS, but when justice needed a champion, when family needed protection, when one of his own was threatened, Gibbs would always find his way home. And somewhere in the icy waters of Alaska, the former agent returned to his quiet life, knowing that once again justice had prevailed. Not because of rules, not because of politics, but because one stubborn Marine refused to stand aside when his family was in danger. And that was exactly why NCIS would never forget Leroy Jethro Gibbs.